Well, U.S. President Donald Trump is wrapping up the second leg of his Asia trip in Japan after the country heaped promises of foreign investment and a Nobel Prize nomination for Mr. Trump.
The newly elected Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi also signed a framework agreement with Mr. Trump for supplying rare earths to the U.S.
Yeah, they also signed a document heralding a new golden age of U.S.-Japan relations. It reiterates the commitment of the two countries to implement deals, including a 15% tariff deal negotiated earlier this year. The agreement also established a $550 billion fund for Japanese investments in America.
実は安倍総理からはよくトランプ大統領のダイナミックな外交について話を聞いていました。タイとカンボジアの停戦に成功し、トランプ大統領はまずアジアの平和に貢献をされました。それから先般の中東における合意の実現もですね、これはかつてない歴史的偉業です。
And the two leaders also flew to the nuclear-powered U.S. aircraft carrier George Washington, docked at the base near Tokyo. Ms. Takaichi had lauded Tokyo's close military alliance with the U.S. and vowed to strengthen Japan's defense capabilities. The pledge to hike defense spending includes a commitment to acquire Tomahawk cruise missiles from the U.S. as part of a contract signed in January 2024.
Japan respects us. If you see what's going on all over the world, they're respecting us again. They respect us like never before. The treatment they gave me all over as I go around to different countries is great, but it's really a respect for me, but it's a bigger respect for our country. They respect our country again.
For more on Mr. Trump's trip to Tokyo, let's speak now with Sheila Smith. She's a senior fellow for Asia-Pacific Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you for joining us, Sheila. So both leaders spoke of a new golden age in U.S.-Japan relations. What does that mean? Is it a reset of priorities or just a rebranding of long-standing alliance?
Thank you, Jill. It's lovely to be with you. So I would put it in the rebranding category. Prime Minister Takaichi, as you know, has just become Japan's prime minister. She is the first female prime minister to lead that country, and she was voted into office by their legislature within days of this meeting, very vital meeting for Japan with President Trump. She was using the language that President Trump used in his first speech after his inauguration as a golden era for America. She is introducing this idea of a golden era for the U.S.-Japan alliance. But she did bring to the table some very significant contributions on the Japanese side. She's promised to put her efforts behind increasing Japan's share of military spending, Japan's contribution to the U.S.-Japan alliance, including strengthening deterrence, and of course, as your opening story remarked, this critical minerals and rare earths agreement, which is a supply chain cooperation agreement between the United States and Japan.
Yeah, and given all that, this trip is happening ahead of expected talks between Mr. Trump and China's President Xi. How much real economic benefit do you think Japan and the U.S. will gain from this announcement, and how much of it is largely symbolic in the lead up to that meeting?
Well, there's the idea here is to present the U.S.-Japan alliance as stronger than ever, and to continue the future. Will have this sort of doubling down on the alliance. President Trump fed right into that narrative. He was very clear and very personal about the alliance, and he said that you can come to me with any problem, any question, any issues. The United States is there for Japan. So it wasn't a kind of negotiating moment. It was a real statement by both leaders on the importance of the alliance. But ahead of the Trump-Xi meeting, I think that joint agreement on, agreeing to work together globally to ensure the supply of critical minerals and rare earths was a little bit of a signal to President Xi that there would be other efforts other than the bilateral U.S.-China effort on rare earths. So I think there's a lot of signaling going on there, and I think it was very helpful for President Trump as he goes into that meeting. I also believe that Prime Minister Takaichi, she's quite hawkish on defense. She has really indicated both to her public at home and also to the president that she is really intent on increasing Japan's contributions to the alliance, but also the amount of money that Japan spends on its hard power, its military power, which is a real departure.
Yeah, on your point on rare earth agreement, Sheila, it was signed almost immediately. I wonder how significant this deal is in practice. And also, with Mr. Trump pushing to build supply chains that bypass China, could it strengthen Washington's leverage, or would it risk creating a new point of tension with Beijing?
Well, I think the point of tension is already there. You know, the Chinese have said that they are going to be monitoring and restricting their rare earth exports. As you know, China is a major supplier of rare earth and critical minerals to the world, not just the United States. Japan has also had that experience with China, you know, quota system that restricts access to rare earth minerals. I think you're going to see allies, U.S. and Japan now first, but also obviously Australia and others begin to talk about trying to work together to ensure access to these vital minerals that are required for all of the high industrial economies for their technological innovation and also just sustainability. So I think the cooperation is a signal to Beijing. It doesn't sidestep the reality that China continues to be the primary supplier of rare earth minerals to the world.
And after this high-profile meeting between Japan and the U.S., trade negotiations will continue. I wonder how tricky will it be for Ms. Takaichi to defend industries like agriculture and autos while keeping Washington on side?
Well, you know, the tariff agreement was reached this last year with Japan and the United States. There is the big sort of to be refined is the deal on Japanese investment in the United States, foreign direct investment. There is a pledge of $550 billion of Japanese investment in the U.S. economy, something that the president believes that he can decide who is going to invest what where. But it'll be more complicated than that. The Japanese government has agreed to guarantee loans and grants and underwrite private sector investment in projects, but the Japanese have a veto on what kinds of projects. I still think that you saw some time during this visit by President Trump with corporate Japan sort of stepping up to say that what industries, what areas, what regions they were interested in investing in the United States. So I think these are deals that have yet to get full clarity, and I think we'll watch that unfold. The tariff piece, I think, has been largely resolved. You also saw some token, well, I shouldn't say token, but some demonstrable attempt to placate President Trump by the Japanese government's purchase of Ford trucks that are huge in the Japanese on Japanese roads. But the Japanese government is going to invest in some trucks because President Trump thought that was important, and of course there'll be some agricultural compromises as well.
Yeah, and Sheila, this was also seen as Prime Minister Takaichi's first diplomatic test after being elected. So how would you assess her performance?
I saw it on TV, so I saw it from a distance, but I was very impressed by how comfortable she looked. Of course, it's for her to meet President Trump first on her own native soil, I think increases the comfort level. Welcoming him to Tokyo is much, much easier than flying across the Pacific and coming to the White House for the first meeting. There was a lot of invocation, as you probably know, of former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, who is her mentor, and she's quite close to his widow, Abe Akie. So there was a lot of reference to the friendship between President Trump and then Prime Minister Abe. It was a very comfortable setting and it looked like they had time to develop a little bit of a rapport. They were on Marine One, the helicopter, for 30 minutes alone, just the two of them on their way to Yokosuka base, which you showed in your intro. So they did have some time together, and they looked, from a distance anyway, from my perspective, they looked remarkably comfortable given the high stakes of that meeting, both for Prime Minister Takaichi in particular.
All right, Sheila, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for your time and your insight this morning. Sheila Smith, a senior fellow for Asia Pacific Studies at the Council on Foreign Affairs. foreign relations, that is.